True peace kens the world's post-pandemic agenda and the global debt, man. Peep the slang. Although the COVID-19 pandemic continues to be the number one item on the global agenda, climate change, cyber terrorism, including the spread of misinformation on social media, and global and regional geopolitical uncertainties and threats continue to raise concerns amidst the global pandemic. Man, peep the slang. However, the day the effects of the pandemic begin to wane, a rather difficult challenge awaits the world economy: the global debt spiral. Global debt, which is expected to reach 300 trillion or 365% of global gross domestic product GDP by the end of 2021, and scares many international institutions. Man, peep the slang. Debt numbers, let's talk them. Global debt, which was 260 trillion when the pandemic broke out at the beginning of 2020, has already reached 290 trillion by the autumn of 2021, with the increase of 3 trillion. Global debt, which was 242 trillion in 2017, reached 245 trillion in 2018 and 257 trillion in 2019. It then jumped to 281 trillion by the end of 2020 after the pandemic began, having been 259.7 trillion at the end of the first quarter of 2020. Then at the end of the first quarter of 2021, it had increased by almost 30 trillion in 1 year, reaching 288.7 trillion. Roughly 5 trillion of this 30 trillion increase came from households. 8 trillion of it was from the real sector, which 3 trillion was from the financial sector. A debt increase of roughly 14 trillion was on the public side, led by the borrowing of developed economies. The least developed country groups, which represent 13% of the world's population, also contains 38% of the world's poorest population. Sadly, since the pandemic broke out, the number of impoverished people, those earning less than TL 559 per month, has increased by 35 million in the 48 least developed countries, where 280 million very poor people are already struggling to survive. Therefore, with these countries completely losing their ability to pay their current debts, the declaration of a global moratorium and the restructuring of the debts of these countries could be discussed. Perhaps a significant portion of the debts of said countries could be shaved or written off. Man, peep the slang. GDP numbers. From 2019 to the end of March 2021, with the ratio of Greece's total debt to GDP increased by 65%, Singapore's increased by 60%, Spain by 57%, Canada and France by 54%, that of Greek Cypriots by 50%, Italy, the United Kingdom, and Japan by 40%, and the US by 37%. In other words, while the total debt GDP ratio of the US was 108.19% at the end of 2019, it reached 127.65% at the end of the first quarter of 2021. The latest report of the Congressional Budget Office, CBO, shows that as federal budget revenues are not sufficient to finance federal budget expenditures that will reach 6.8 trillion by the end of 2021. Okay, the fiscal revenue deficit to be financed by the U.S. Federal Reserve will exceed 3 trillion, while the global debt spiral has made an international economic institution and central bank permit. Turkey's EU defined public debt to GDP ratio, which was 32.5% in 2019, is expected to regress to 36.6% in 2021 after increasing to 39% in 2020. The rate of increase is only 11.2%. I hope Turkey's positive growth success and records record the 2020 and 2023 pandemic period, thanks to its fiscal discipline, will never be forgotten. Man, peep the slang. GDP. These numbers.